I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the primary parents, whether they work full-time, part-time, or devote all their time to their children, feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their roles. One thing I know from personal experience is being a lead dad is not a traditional role for men. Parenting is so often left to mothers or paid caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and create a community for fathers who are lead dads and for other dads who want to learn. Today, my guest is Carrie Schwab Pomerantz, an absolute expert in family finance. Carrie is a board chair and president of the Charles Schwab Foundation, managing director of Charles Schwab and Company, and board chair of Schwab Charity. She served 2 White House administrations. She advised the Council on Financial Literacy under President George W. Bush, and in 2010, she was appointed by President Obama to the President's Advisory Council on Financial Capability. For kids, she has pushed the Schwab Foundation to promote financial literacy for children, partnering with the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. She's written several books, but the most relevant for our discussion today is the one she wrote with her dad, Charles Schwab. It Pays to Talk: How to Have Essential Conversations with Your Family About Money and Investing. I'm thrilled that Carrie is here to share her expertise and deep knowledge on how families figure out their finances. Carrie, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Nice to see you.
Our goal at the Company of Dads, or one of our goals, is to help families fulfill their full potential. And our starting point is normalizing, lead dads, that role where men are the primary parents, primary caregivers. Your husband, Gary, is a journalist. You've got 3 growing kids. How did you divide things up when they were young, when the kids were younger?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So we've been married a lot of years, and I don't even want to tell you because it will age me. And I would say that the first 15 years of our marriage, Gary was the primary breadwinner. And then, after that 15 years, we had a little struggle about actually moving back to San Francisco, where the Charles Schwab was headquartered. And, we battled it out a little bit and, got some help actually even talking about it. It was more about the move and moving back home to my home. And, but we finally did it. And that's when I became the primary breadwinner. So in a sense, I guess we've always tried to put in our fair share, when it comes to sharing roles and responsibilities, especially for the kids and for the family. Now, admittedly, it's not always perfectly fair and it ebbs and flows. And, again, it's always a conversation around who does what.
But when
even with grown children,
I
Paul,
bet.
even when you don't have kids in the house.
I bet. When you moved back to San Francisco, were your kids older, or was he really, when you went to work for Schwab, was he really kind of coming in and being, that lead dad, sort of, driving around, taking them places?
No, not so much. I mean, admittedly, we got help because he was still working. He was writing his books at the time, teaching at Stanford and so forth. So, he did continue to pursue his career. Now, he was much more flexible. He was more likely to coach the kids' sports teams and pick, and I don't know, fill in those gaps where our babysitter was not available and so forth. So he was definitely more flexible.
Yeah.
And by the way, he also purposely, I had a commute. We lived in Marin and I had about a 45 minute, sometimes even an hour commute. And he worked 5 minutes from our home, and he purposely did that so he could sort of pick up the pieces.
Yeah, and he could pop home if need be. Or,
Yeah.
When you think, this is more kind of not personal, more of a leaning on your expertise. When you think about, couples and the tough conversations they have to have around, finances or who's going to, work the less flexible job, what are some tips that you give about, the right way to talk about money and finances in a marriage?
Well, first of all, I'm a big believer in, financial literacy financial security starts with a family conversation. And when I talk about conversations, it's between spouses, between parents and their children, and even between adults and their older parents. That's how you create more financial security in your family. Now, with a couple, what is the stat, Paul? Probably in the majority of divorces that happen in this country are because of kids and because of money. And I do believe that everyone comes into a marriage with money baggage, and usually it comes from their own life experiences, from their messages from their parents and grandparents, and it shapes how they work with money or deal with money emotionally. And sometimes they follow their parents' footsteps, and sometimes they go the complete opposite. But the bottom line is you're now blending with somebody else, and it's the time where you want to establish through your own family money values, which then direct how you save, spend, and share your money with others, whether it's philanthropy or grown children or whatever. And when I say about values, it could be anywhere from education, uh, uh, being together as a family, philanthropy. It could be all sorts of different things. In our family, one of the principles we try to pass on to our kids is that it's not about net worth; it's about self worth, and we try to get our kids unfocused about it. We did live in a pretty wealthy community. All of the Bay Area is pretty wealthy.
Pretty much
So
all of it, yeah.
yeah. So anyway, the bottom line is we had to manage it among ourselves, and then obviously with our children as well. And so having that conversation of your goals, your priorities, your money values, and that's what sort of directs you, the framework for how you operate going forward.
I mean, if you think about it, most Americans, you generally start off, you've met your spouse, and you're both working, and maybe there's a disparity in income, but maybe it's not. Maybe you're both just starting out, and it's roughly the same. Do you think that the conversations change around money in a family when uh, the wife out earns the husband, or the husband takes on a less traditional role, or vice versa? The husband is the higher earner. Does that change the dynamic, or are there lots of ways to
Yeah,
prevent
I
it?
mean, so technically it shouldn't change the
Yeah, right.
dynamics, right? Because women have been supporting their husbands in their careers, since the beginning of time. But the reality is that men have been socialized to be the breadwinner. That's just a fact. And I know, Paul, you have this podcast just for that very reason, which I think is wonderful. But I think if when the woman in the family makes more money, well, let me take a step back. With my husband, whenever he succeeds in whatever it is, right? His books, his writing, whatever, I am always so proud. And that's because I love him, I respect him, I think he's deserving, I see him work hard. And I think that if men could flip that, and remember how much they respect and love their partner, and that I think will help in terms of how you think about the woman in this case, because we're talking about gender roles, is making money. And also remember that women have overcome a lot of barriers in society, in terms of earning their fair share, in terms of getting in the C-suite. We're not there. So I think it's also a time for a male spouse to be really supportive and proud that their wife surpassed those barriers.
Mhm.
So I think if we could flip the conversation in a way and how we think about it.
Yeah,
Thankfully it's changing, as you know, Paul. I mean, a lot more men are taking on, I'll call it, like you said, the lead role in the family.
yeah, yeah, and then all the demographics point to that, and we all know that demographics are destiny. But I want to go back to when you said when you first moved back to the Bay Area, you had about a 45, 60 minute commute. You know, 2019, everybody is working differently. Fast forward to today. Every company, I'm sure Schwab is probably one of them. You're trying to figure out how people are going to work, and people got used to being working from home for 2 years, and many of them were very productive. How do you think the sort of whatever this new world of work is going to be in 2022? How is that going to influence the conversations that employees are able to have with their employers, whether they're men or women, around, getting some time to be a caregiver to their children. Do you think, COVID has changed the way that people will be able to, if employees will be able to have those conversations with their managers and their employers?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the managers are experiencing these circumstances themselves, right? And I think companies today, especially given the competition for good talent, companies have to be flexible and understanding. Right now, Schwab is going hybrid. We just started going back to work a couple of months ago now, and we don't want to lose anybody because we're asking people to come back to work. So we have a good percentage of employees that are working from home 90% of the time. Our hope is to get people back 3 days a week, and there's many who want to come back at that time. But I do think it will be interesting to see how hybrid work changes the roles of families. And I personally,
Yeah.
so I didn't have little kids during the pandemic, so I know it was so hard for parents at that time to, when their kids weren't even going to school and they were in the house and you had to help them with their school and then also work. I think employers really understood that. At least the good ones did. But I do think it's going to change the dynamic a little bit among families as well. In fact, I think it's going to open up so many more possibilities. I wish I had that raising my children. I think I would, I've aged a lot with that big commute and so forth. But I could have had a lot more flexibility and seen my kids more. But again, it's a different dynamic. You're going to have to get help in in the home and so forth. But thankfully, kids are going back to school too.
Yeah, no, I know. So I live in, outside of New York City in Connecticut, and our town is, a commuter town. But people are going back into the city taking the train, but not in any way in the volume that they were before. Before it was, 5 days a week,
Right,
and if you didn't, you weren't committed to your job. You just weren't a committed worker, and you weren't going to be promoted. And now it's,
right.
I think
Totally.
part of that stigma is gone. And yeah, people are going in, 3 days a week probably, but they're going in a more intentional way. Like, okay, I'm going in for these 3 days, and I have you know blocks of meetings lined up where I'm going to be working with colleagues. And when I'm at home, I'm not playing golf. I'm doing more intentional work. And you see a lot more dads doing the drop off. I think, and I'm hoping this is sort of one of the company of dads missions, is that there's some positive coming out of COVID, that, it's not just, women for decades have been penalized for having children. They have, their pay has been hurt. They haven't been promoted at the same rates. But, on the flip side, there's been research on, men have traditionally been afraid to ask for time to be with their kids. They rarely take paid
Right.
time off, because again, they feel like they're going to see as not committed to work. And I just think, I'd love to see you hear how your perspective from the Schwab perspective, but you know how do you foresee people still being great workers, excellent workers, committed workers, but good human beings as well? Like, how do you think, what do you think companies have learned from the pandemic that might enable them to focus more on the outcomes than the face time, so that if a mom or dad wants some time to go watch a daughter play field hockey or ballet, do you think we're getting there, that would be more acceptable for employers to trust their
Absolutely. I mean,
employees?
I know as a manager, I totally get it, and I want people to feel balanced. I mean, the bottom line is if you have an employee that's always stressed for whatever reason, whether it's because they have to deal with their kids or money or whatever it is he or she is not going to be productive. So I think the more that you can be flexible as an employer, the more loyal and hardworking the employee will be. Now, admittedly, I mean, we still have performance reviews. They're still required to meet, their goals and so forth. And so you manage performance in that way. But also, what I do worry about, Paul, are younger employees, they're the ones, if they don't come in, are not going to get the visibility among the
Right.
more senior people. The promotions are going to be farther, they're not going to be as available. So I do encourage employees to get in and develop relationships, network, and so forth. No, for any employee, quite
Yeah.
frankly, who's trying to strive in their career.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. You talked. I mentioned in the introduction about the book you wrote with your dad. When you think about, because we talked about you and your husband and your kids, but when you think about, looking backwards, what you learned from your father over the years, are there particular lessons that really stand out for you?
Well, there's a lot of lessons. Do you have some time?
Sure. I want the good ones and the bad ones. No, it can't just be all
Okay.
the good
Well,
ones.
I mean, I have a lot to share. Let me see, and you can break me up if you want, or
Yeah.
ask me some questions in between. But so a lot of people don't realize that my dad was a struggling businessman for all my childhood. He did not become the Charles Schwab that people know of today well into my 20s, late 20s. Even then, if you read his book, I mean, Schwab was, teetered up and down for a number of years. My parents were sort of traditional. My mom was a homemaker. My dad, worked, or at least, tried to start a couple businesses that never, basically flopped. And I was 9 years old when they divorced. And it was the beginning of divorce in our society. It was not very well known, and it really tore our family apart. And I would say we still pay some of the price today. And my dad would admit that as well. And he also looks back, he says, I don't even know why I started Schwab. I was in debt. I was divorced. What was I even thinking or doing? But what I wanted to share about the divorce is I think it subconsciously really affected me when it comes to money. Uh, First of all, my mom being the traditional homemaker made me realize that we need in this case, woman to be involved with their finances. Both partners have to be involved. Doesn't mean you have to balance the checkbook, write pay the bills, but you both need to know where your money is, the institutions are at, what are you invested in, and also what are all the, being involved with all the big decisions. No matter whose role, who was the primary, I'll say money lead. And so that was that. I think that was one message for me, and that's why financial literacy has been so important to me. And but also, my dad, I think, subconsciously taught me to have a strong work ethic and to save. And I have worked since I was 13. I'm, up there in age, and I've never
What
need
what was your first job? What was your first job when you were
well,
13?
I paper route like
Okay.
most people, although
Yeah.
not a lot of girls had paper routes. But I did the
Wait,
babysitting. I even
you
tried
had
to
a
house
paper
sit.
route? You had a paper route and you married a journalist? Like, it was like destiny. Huh?
I know. I don't know. Anyway, it's funny. I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, I had always worked. In fact, I've been working for Schwab on and off since I was 16 years old, summers and so forth, and after school, but always working, and then always saving, savings. And kind of the same time, I think I was 9 or 10 years old, opened up my savings account. And I've just, been a worker and a saver ever since,
Mhm.
because I want always to have that independence. So those are money values that, I don't think my parents intentionally taught
Yeah.
me, but they did. But I have to share a funny investing story if you want.
Sure. I'd love to hear it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was working at Schwab. I was 23 years old. I just got my broker's license. I opened up my IRA, and that was just the beginning when IRAs were becoming, sort of a lead retirement option
Yeah.
vehicle for people. And I put in my $2,000. That's what you could do, which was a lot of money for a 23-year-old.
Mhm.
And I called my dad and to get help. Where would I invest it? And he said, Carrie, just go to our mutual fund marketplace. We were just starting to offer mutual funds to our clients. Pick two equity funds, just two. It doesn't really matter which one. And I still remember this day how disappointed I was, Paul, that he did not tell me what the hot stock was.
Exactly. I mean, your dad was Charles Schwab. I mean, come on, you wanted him to
No,
the skies would part and you would have the hot tip. You could tell all your friends.
I would be so rich now. But anyway, I have to laugh. And it's exactly what I've taught my children, talk about all the time. It's not about the hot stock, it's about participating in the market,
Yeah, and
especially in a diversified way.
right, and to break it down for the listeners, I mean, essentially, what he was teaching you in a way that you thought was, like, not what you wanted to hear, but he was teaching you what really mattered the most was that you were investing. What mattered the
Yes.
most is that you were making that commitment, and if you were 23 years old, whatever the hot stock was then was not the hot stock today, and who knows, maybe that company has gone bankrupt or been acquired or any number of things have happened, but when you have that diversified portfolio and then every year you add your 2,000 or whatever you can add
Yes.
each year, it just builds, and you can kind of forget about it and be hopefully be pleasantly surprised when retirement
Yeah.
comes.
I mean, this equities historically have always outperformed any other investment vehicles, bonds and cash in particular. So, and if you're diversified, yes, you're going to have ups and downs in the market, but over the long term, it should go up.
You
So,
know, you told me some stories here that kind of point to my next question, which is how influenced kids are by, what they see their parents doing, not necessarily, what their parents say, and that's, certainly in my case. You've listed a few about saving and all this, but when you think about behaviors that parents, that mothers or fathers, whether they're the lead parent or not, the behaviors that they can model that are going to set their children up for success around money. What are some of those key behaviors? And of course, the flip side would be, what are the behaviors they shouldn't model? What are the things that you don't want your kids doing as they grow up and become financially independent?
yeah. So I have a bunch of things, I have a lot to say about that. Let me just start with again, it's similar to when you get married, you share your money values. I've studied this a fair amount. Of course, I'm not a therapist or a psychologist, but I've studied it. And what's most important if you want to raise sort of solid kids when it comes around money values is not only teach them the technical side of money, but also pass on your values, what's important to you, and as a family. I will share a story when so with my kids, they did get an allowance. I never had an allowance. Uh, and I always encouraged them to work. When they were 16, it was like chop chop. They had to get their summer jobs, and and I think they thank me for that to this day. So the technical side and the value side, and what experts say is if you put those two together, you're much more likely to kind of keep you're going to have more financial security over generations, if
Mm,
that makes sense.
yeah.
You hear about the shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve, or one generation makes it, the next generation spends it, and the third generation loses it.
Yeah.
But that's how you grow and pass on wealth to multiple generations. So that's what I've tried to do with my own kids. Now, we live in the Bay Area, and I'm sure you're kind of in the same way, where it's a lot of wealthy communities.
Mhm.
And my husband and I, we really struggled with that, because we wanted our children to be grounded financially, grounded in their, it wasn't not about net worth. It's about self-worth and
Mhm.
striving and so forth. And when my oldest son turned 16, we did have to buy him a car, because we had too many people going two different, many different ways. And my son told me, you know, joyfully about his friend who got a BMW. And oh my God, it's like, are you kidding me? And I mean, I didn't even drive a BMW.
Right.
And, we talked about it a little bit. And I was sort of irritated. And I said, Ross, we're not that kind of family. We don't buy BMWs. And anyway, he finally said, Mom, I know. I'm not asking for a BMW. I don't want a BMW.
Yeah.
And we ended up, getting him a Honda Accord or something. And I just felt like, yes, it wasn't about the money and status for him. And it was really about, the inside of him and
Well, that's
being
great. That's
confident.
such a sign of sort of parenting success, though, Carrie, because he was telling you that story as an observation. Like, can you believe, my friend got a
Yes.
BMW? He wasn't telling it as, oh my goodness, I wish I had a BMW, or how come I don't get a BMW? So that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Where he probably was thinking like, it's a bit much for a 16-year-old driving back and forth to high school.
Yeah. Now it is hard today, right? As a parent, if you have financial means, you want nice things in life. And your kids are going to see that. But I still think, working as a parent is a good money value. Again, striving in your life and having purpose and so forth. So I think there's different ways to model, whether you're involved philanthropically and so forth. So and just the way your being is being a role model.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things my wife and I try to do is really kind of connect, work with wages, and so that our children see like you have to do something to earn this money, and then once you've earned this money, you have choices with it. And invariably kids are comparative beings, they're comparative machines. They walk into a house and it's different than their house, and they'll either say in their minds, why is this house bigger than my house, or why is this house
Yeah.
smaller than my house? They're only, or why is this house cleaner than my house? Why is this house dirtier than my house? That's just how kids. And for us, we always set it up as choices, so that the last thing you want to do is throw your kids, friends, parents under the bus and say, I don't know, I think they're excessive and crazy. Why do you need to drive a Ferrari to the train station? That's absurd. But instead we talk about like, well, they made a choice with their money, and just to sort of reiterate, this is how
Yeah.
mom and I are
Here,
making choices with our money. This is what we believe
yeah.
is important.
This is what's most important, helping you guys with your college or giving back to society or whatever it is. So Paul, I have to share one thing though, because there's so much to say about raising money wise kids. But since you were talking about lead dads
Mhm.
in, here, I do want to say that dads can help break the gender inequities in a family and society. And I think you've heard me talk about how our studies at Schwab, third party studies show that parents talk to their daughters differently than their sons when it comes to money.
Yeah,
And I,
I want to talk to you about this. So back, tell me the study for the listeners who are hearing this for the first time.
yeah,
How do
so,
they talk
so
differently? Why do they talk differently? Yeah.
that was one reason why we wrote the book, It Pays to Talk, is this study showed that parents talk to their sons about the stock market, debt, estate planning, but with their daughters, they talk about budgeting, savings, and household expenses.
Mm.
All important, but that is not what's going to help young women build wealth. And there has been multiple studies even to this day that parents don't talk the same with their children. Even allowances, they pay their sons more for the same chore. It's just the most bizarre
Right.
thing. But I do think, again, we're perpetuating social role or gender roles. And I think subconsciously, of course, you don't want to treat your daughter any differently than
Right.
your son. I just think it's again, it kind of goes back to, you were talking about dads struggling with being the lead.
Yeah.
It's just ingrained in our society. And in fact, I was speaking at a women's conference, and this was when I say older woman, I mean, she was middle age. And she said, Carrie, I remember when my dad wanted to talk about money, he asked me to leave the room so he could talk to my brother.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, you hear stories. If you start to talk, to maybe our generation, you'll hear a lot of stories. And I do think we still do it. We perpetuate that. So we've got to, with our daughters, we've got to teach them about investing and building wealth so that they're comfortable. Studies show
Yeah.
far more women than men lack confidence when it comes to investing. And
But
that's part of starting at home, the conversation. And that's where dads, again, can
yeah.
really break those barriers.
When you talk about, you kind of had that dichotomy, the way fathers talk to their sons about investing and debt, and estate planning, which is incredibly morbid when the kid's 14, but whatever. And they talk about the other, sort of the expense management essentially side, the
Yeah.
wealth building side on one hand, and the expense management side on the other hand. But I think in a lot of ways, they're probably doing both children a disservice not to have the same conversation with both of them, so that the daughter gets the wealth building on top of the expense management, but that the son also gets that expense management component on top of the wealth building.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah. Within your means.
living within your
Right.
means, exactly. Yeah, because we all see this. I mean, where you live, there are people with the fanciest houses in the world, the fanciest cars in the world. And then you realize they're leveraged to the hilt, and
Yes.
anything goes south. Well, what are they going to do? They haven't had that talk in expense management.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. What is it? The millionaire? No, not the millionaire next door, but there's a lot of books on that people
rich
who,
dad, poor dad. Yeah, rich dad, poor
yeah.
dad. Yeah.
Well, people look like they're very, very wealthy. And like you said, they just over leverage
Yeah.
and making choices that are going to hurt them in the long run.
It's been great, Gary. Last question. Is it ever too young to start talking to your kids about money, or are there ways to do it, in an age appropriate way from early on?
Totally age appropriate. I'm just going to tell you a couple what I believe. And again, every family is different, right? We all have our own values and lessons and goals that we want to share with our children. So I don't want to say that my way is the highway, but I started with my kids with an allowance, 5, 6 years old, very little, like $1 a week or something like that. And that was their first time to actually place value on money. When my son, I think he was 7 years old, he loved Pokemon cards. He was trying to beg me, he had plenty, but he was begging me to buy some when we were in a store. And I said, wait a minute, Win, you have your own allowance. You can pay for it. And he said, he said, I think I'll pass.
Yes, yes. I had the
Right?
exact same thing happen with my daughters, where they
Yeah.
want something, want something, want something. They're like, well, actually, you saved the money. Why don't you buy it, or why don't you pay half of it? Since this is more expensive than we would get for you, we'll pay the price of
Yeah.
whatever the thing is, a pair of shorts or whatever, and you pay the other half. And 9 times out of 10, they're like, actually, I don't think I need it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's such a
yeah.
great lesson. But I will tell you one other thing that I want to make sure that your listeners, and that is, it kind of goes back to the investing. When all 3 of my kids turned 12, I took them to the Schwab office. They had some savings, and had them go sit down with a financial consultant, fill out the paperwork and learn about investing from the financial consultant. I wanted to demystify the whole notion of working with a financial institution and investing for the future. Now, my boys, they had no problem. When my youngest, who's a daughter, she turned 12, she just kept delaying the process. And then she said, "Oh, Mom, can you just do it and open my account for me?" And I said, absolutely
No way.
not. You are
Yeah.
coming into Schwab. And in particular, she was, to me, that was my highest priority, to get her to feel really comfortable, because so many women, unfortunately, relative, to the relative to the number of men, are intimidated by financial institutions and investing. So I want to break that barrier or
That's
that
wonderful.
cycle.
Yeah, that's so important. But tell me, there has to be a punchline. Tell me that Grandpa Chuck walked down in the Schwab office and said to your daughter, "Google. There you go. There's your stock tip."
No. But he's always talking. I will tell you, he does give them some money at Christmas every year. And he always wants them to invest in, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about a Schwab product, Schwab 1000 fund. It's an ETF with 1,000 largest companies in the United States. It's kind of like an S&P 500 fund. And again, he is still passing on that same, message to my kids. And
Yeah.
it's about participating in the market. It's not about the hot stock. 1,000 top companies in the country that they get to invest in this one fund.
I think that's wonderful. It's a wonderful lesson for anybody, because
Yes.
not all 1,000 companies are going to go up. Not all 1,000 companies are going to go down. And having that diversification, you'll turn out fine in the end.
And he writes it in a letter to them. And every once in a while they'll say, "Can I take a little bit and spend it toward, whatever,
Yeah.
my rent?"
Yeah. This is great.
Yeah.
Carrie, thank you so much for joining me today on the Company of Dads podcast. It was great to talk to you and great to catch up with you again.
Great to talk to you too, Paul, as always.